I found the phone on a Sunday. Not by searching. I want to be precise about that, because it matters. I was not a suspicious husband rummaging through drawers or checking pockets. I was a man looking for a phone charger, specifically the white one that fit the older model tablet the boys used for homework, which had a habit of migrating to whatever flat surface Vivian had last set her bag on. I was looking in the drawer of the bedside table on her side of the bed, the shallow one she kept lip balm and reading glasses in, and beneath a folded sleep mask I found a phone I had never seen before. It was a budget model. Matte black, no case. The kind of phone you buy with cash from a display rack at a pharmacy. I held it for a moment. The bedroom was quiet. Vivian was downstairs. The boys were at a neighbor's house. The late afternoon light was doing that particular Richmond thing where it comes through the curtains sideways and makes everything look slightly amber and suspended. The phone was warm, which meant it had been on recently, which meant it had a charge, which meant someone had been using it. I set it back exactly where I found it. Replaced the sleep mask. Closed the drawer. I went back downstairs. I found a different charger. I plugged in the tablet. I sat at the kitchen table while Vivian moved around the kitchen making dinner, and I watched her move. The particular economy of her movements, the way she never wasted motion in a kitchen, the way she set down utensils with the same precise placement every time. And I thought about the warm phone in the drawer upstairs and said nothing. That was the first decision. Every subsequent event in the next 4 months flows from it. My name is Nathan. I'm 43 years old and I am, professionally, a forensic accountant, which means I spend my working life looking for things that are hidden inside numbers, following money through layers of obfuscation until the truth becomes visible and undeniable. I am paid to be patient. I am paid to build airtight cases before I make a single accusation. I am paid to understand that the moment you reveal what you know is the most important strategic decision in any investigation. I had spent 17 years developing those instincts. I did not know, sitting at that kitchen table watching Vivian slice onions with the precision she applied to everything, that I was about to use every single one of them on my own marriage. Vivian and I had been together for 14 years, married for 12. We met when she was 25 and working in hotel management, a career she'd left 6 years into our marriage, ostensibly to focus on the boys when they started school, and then had never fully returned to. She'd done some freelance event planning since then, occasional contracts, nothing sustained. The household ran on my salary, which was substantial enough that this had never created tension. I had not examined that arrangement closely enough. That was my first mistake, and I made it years before I found the phone. We had twin sons, Leo and Sam, 13 years old, different in every way that twins can be different. Leo deliberate and interior, Sam loud and physical, both of them in the specific turbulent passage between childhood and whatever came next. They were the realest thing in the house. They still are. The dinner Vivian made that Sunday was a chicken dish she'd been making for years, something with lemon and capers that I had always liked. We ate together, the four of us, and the boys argued about a video game, and Vivian mediated with the calm authority she brought to everything, and I ate my dinner and contributed to the conversation in all the right places and thought about nothing except the warm phone in the drawer upstairs. After the boys were in bed, Vivian went up to read. I heard the bedside drawer open and close. The phone was still there. She checked it. She put it back. I lay beside her in the dark and stared at the ceiling and began, very quietly, to plan. I need to go back further because the phone was not the beginning. It was the moment the beginning became visible. 12 years of marriage contains its own archaeology, layers of ordinary life compressed into patterns, habits, textures. Vivian and I had built a life that functioned well by any external measure. The house in the Westover Hills neighborhood, the boys in a good school, the dinner parties we hosted seasonally, the vacations we planned with the specific organizational rigor that Vivian brought to everything she managed. We were, by appearance and by most internal measures, a solid household. But solid is not the same as transparent. And I understand now, made a fundamental accounting error. I had audited the surface and accepted it as the full picture. The signs, assembled now with the precision I apply to financial reconstructions, from a pattern I should have flagged earlier. Each one, alone, had an innocent reading. Together, they tell a different story. The cash withdrawals began approximately 2 years before the phone. Not large amounts, Nothing that would trigger a review in most households. 200 here, 300 there, always from different ATMs, always at intervals irregular enough to avoid any obvious rhythm. I am a forensic accountant. I reviewed our accounts monthly as a matter of professional habit. I saw the withdrawals. I assigned them to the same mental category as the grocery runs and the occasional clothing purchase. The ordinary financial texture of a household where one partner manages the domestic expenses. I did not ask. That was the second mistake, and it is the one I find hardest to forgive in myself. The phone schedule emerged in retrospect. Vivian was a creature of precise routine, one of the things I'd always found admirable and occasionally maddening about her. She woke at the same time, exercised at the same time, had the same structure to her days. But there were gaps in the routine that I had accepted as vague. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, roughly 2 to 5, when she was ostensibly handling client meetings for the event planning work. The work was real. I'd seen contracts, invoices, occasional emails she'd share when a project was going well. The work was also, I now understand, a skeleton that the other life hung itself on. My best friend Marcus had noticed something before I had, which is both unsurprising and, in retrospect, painful. Marcus spent 20 years as a detective with Richmond PD before moving into private security consulting, and he has the specific quality of attention that career either requires or produces. He notices things without appearing to notice them, files them without announcing they've been filed. We had dinner together, the four of us, in the spring of the previous year. Vivian and his wife Sandra had gone to the kitchen together at some point, and Marcus had said to me, in the easy tone he used for everything, "Viv seems different lately." "Different how?" I'd said. He'd paused with his wine glass halfway to his mouth. "More contained," he said finally. "Like she's managing something." I'd laughed. "She's always managing something." He'd let it go. I know now that he watched me say it and decided I wasn't ready to hear anything else. He was probably right. The red herring arrived in October, 8 months before the phone, and it consumed 3 months of low-grade anxiety and pointed me in entirely the wrong direction. Vivian began mentioning a name, Rowan. Casually, in passing, a designer she'd connected with through a client, someone who was interesting to work with, whose aesthetic she admired. Rowan came up 5 or 6 times over 3 months, always briefly, always with the specific nonchalance that I have since come to understand was practiced. I constructed a narrative around Rowan. Not consciously. I didn't sit down and decide to be jealous of a designer named Rowan. But the name lodged somewhere, and I found myself, without fully acknowledging it, paying attention to when it appeared and when it didn't. I searched the name in the event planning circles Vivian moved in. I found a Rowan who worked in set design for corporate events. Male, late 30s, based in Northern Virginia. For 3 months I was quietly concerned about Rowan. Rowan, I eventually established, was entirely peripheral, a professional contact of precisely the significance Vivian had indicated, nothing more. By the time I confirmed this, I had spent 90 days looking at the wrong thing, which I now believe was not accidental. Vivian had given me Rowan. Not as a deliberate plant, perhaps. I cannot be certain about her intent, but the name had functioned as a redirect, a piece of professional texture that gave my ambient unease somewhere specific and incorrect to land. The phone resolved that completely. The phone made Rowan irrelevant. The Monday after I found the phone, I called Marcus. Not from my office phone. From my own cell, during a walk around the block at lunch. A habit I'd developed for client calls that required privacy, which meant no one would find it unusual. I told Marcus what I'd found. I described it precisely: brand, approximate model, the warmth that indicated recent use, the location. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You put it back." "Exactly where it was." "Good." Another pause. "You haven't said anything to her." "No." "Keep it that way." His voice had shifted, not urgently, but with the particular evenness of a man moving from social mode to professional mode. "I know someone. She's good. Ex-insurance fraud, now private. Her name is Irene. Let me make a call." I said yes. I went back to my office. I sat at my desk and opened a client file and stared at columns of numbers and thought about Vivian's hands moving precisely in the kitchen and the warm phone in the drawer and the cash withdrawals I had never asked about. The discipline required to continue normally while knowing something is wrong is a specific kind of labor. I am constitutionally suited to it. My work requires exactly this capacity, the ability to hold knowledge in a sealed compartment while continuing to function, but I want to be clear that it costs something. Every dinner, every evening on the couch, every ordinary conversation about the boys' schoolwork or weekend plans was conducted across a distance I could feel and Vivian, apparently, could not detect. Or could, and chose not to name. Irene came recommended correctly. She was 51, compact and unhurried, and she met me in a coffee shop on West Carey Street with the manner of someone who had heard worse and would hear worse again and found none of it particularly surprising. She listened to everything I had without interrupting. When I finished, she asked 4 questions, all of them precise, none of them unnecessary. Does she know your work schedule precisely? Yes. Does she have her own transportation? A car, registered in both our names. The secondary phone, does she charge it at home? In the drawer, I think. I've heard that drawer open late at night twice since I found it. Does she have any space in the house that's considered hers? Office, studio, room with a lock. A home office. She uses it for the event planning work. I don't go in there. Irene nodded slowly. Okay, she said. Give me 2 weeks. I paid in cash. The first time in 12 years I'd made a significant cash payment without logging it, and walked back to my car in the October afternoon and felt, strangely, less alone than I had since Sunday. The 2 weeks Irene asked for became 3, because what she found required verification before she presented. I understood that. I waited. I continued the ordinary life of the household. Homework supervision, weekend soccer, a dinner party we'd had scheduled for months that I attended and hosted with complete functionality while knowing what I knew. Leo said something during that period that I've thought about many times since. He was doing homework at the kitchen table, and I was going through mail nearby, and out of nowhere he said, "Dad, do you think people can be 2 different people at once?" I looked up. What do you mean? He shrugged in the elaborate way 13-year-olds shrug when they've said something they're not sure they meant to say. Like, at school someone acts one way, and then outside school they're totally different. Like, which one is real? Both, I said after a moment. That's what's complicated. He nodded and went back to his homework. I went back to the mail. I have since wondered what he'd seen or sensed. Children at 13 are more porous than adults remember being. They don't always know what they've perceived, but they perceive. Irene's report arrived on a Thursday evening via encrypted file, with a password delivered by separate text. I opened it in my locked office at 9 o'clock, after Vivian was in bed and the boys were asleep, with a glass of whiskey I hadn't touched. I read it twice. Then I sat for a long time looking at the middle distance and processing what it meant to be a man who had spent 12 years building a life and had just learned the precise dimensions of what he had not known about it. The report was thorough and entirely without editorializing, which I appreciated. Irene had documented 14 Tuesdays and Thursdays over the 3-week period. On 11 of those afternoons, Vivian had driven to one of 3 locations, 2 hotels in the Short Pump area, 1 private residence in the Bon Air neighborhood. On each occasion, she had entered and exited within 2 to 3 hours. Irene had cross-referenced the locations with a discreet escort listing service operating under a name I had no reason to have ever encountered. The profile had been active for approximately 22 months. 22 months. I closed the file. I picked up the whiskey. I put it back down without drinking. Then I called Douglas. Douglas had been my attorney for 9 years, estate planning, the occasional contract review, the ordinary legal texture of a financially complex household. He was 61, precise, and constitutionally incapable of alarm. When I called him at 9:40 on a Thursday night, he answered on the 3rd ring and said, "This sounds like a different kind of call." "It is," I said. "Come in tomorrow morning." 8 o'clock. I was at his office at 7:50. Douglas listened to everything with the attention he brought to complex financial instruments, complete, unhurried, noting specific details without reaction. When I finished, he asked 3 questions, then was quiet for a moment, then said, "You haven't confronted her." "No." "You haven't changed any financial behavior." "No." "Good. Keep both of those." He folded his hands on the desk. "Here's what we're going to do." What we did, over the next 6 weeks, was construct the most complete picture of our marital finances that had ever existed. I was, professionally, well-positioned for this. I understood asset documentation, account structures, the specific ways money moved through a household over time. Douglas provided the legal framework. Irene continued her documentation, now with a specific focus on the financial dimension, the secondary income, how it was received, where it went. What emerged was meticulous and, in a specific way, impressive. Vivian had maintained a separate financial existence for nearly 2 years, accounts in her name only. The income from the escort work deposited through a payment processing service that converted it to transfers that looked, on the surface, like event planning payments. The cash withdrawals from our joint account had, I now understood, been used to fund the operational costs of the parallel life, the phone plan, certain purchases, the maintenance of a presentation that required ongoing investment. She had done this carefully. Not perfectly. No parallel financial structure is perfect, and I am trained to find the imperfections, but carefully enough that without deliberate examination, it would not have surfaced. The secondary twist arrived in the 5th week, and it reorganized my understanding of the social dimension of what had happened. Priya had known. Priya was Vivian's closest friend from college, the woman who had been at our wedding, who had been to our house dozens of times, who had sent the boys' birthday cards every year without fail, and who I had always liked in the easy, uncomplicated way you like your spouse's oldest friends. Irene's continued documentation had captured a meeting between Vivian and Priya at a cafe in Carytown, routine on its face, except that the encrypted messaging app Irene had identified on the secondary phone showed communication between Vivian and a contact labeled only P that had been running for 18 months. Priya had not participated, but she had known, and she had kept it, and she had sat in my living room and eaten my food and laughed at my jokes while knowing. I added that to the file. I said nothing. The file grew. The red herring from the earlier months had resolved, as I noted, before Irene's involvement. But a new complication emerged in week 4, and this one required careful navigation. Sam, my louder, more external son, came home from school with a specific agitation that was different from his usual high-frequency energy. He sat at the kitchen table and didn't do his homework, and when I asked what was wrong, he said, with the directness that had always been his particular quality, "Someone at school said something about Mom." I kept my voice entirely level. "What did they say? I don't know if it's true." He looked at me directly. "Tyler's older brother said he saw Mom somewhere. Like, in a part of town she wouldn't normally be." I asked which part of town. He told me. It was one of the hotel areas in Irene's report. "Tyler's brother is probably confused," I said. "Lots of people look alike." Sam looked at me for a moment with the evaluating attention of a 13-year-old who is not entirely convinced. Then he went back to his homework. I went into the garage and stood for a while. Then I came back inside and helped Leo with an algebra problem and thought about what it would cost my sons to know what I knew, and understood that the timing of what came next mattered enormously, not just legally, not just financially, but for them. That understanding sharpened everything that followed. I chose a Friday in December. The boys were at a school overnight event, one of those organized camping trips that Leo had dreaded for weeks and Sam had been counting down to. They left on the school bus at 7 in the morning, backpacks enormous, Sam loudly announcing that he would definitely win whatever competition was planned, Leo quiet and slightly pale and braver than he wanted to appear. I watched them go from the front door. Then I went back inside, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table and waited for Vivian to come downstairs. She came down at 8:15 in her exercise clothes, saw me sitting there with coffee and a folder on the table in front of me, and something in the way I was sitting, the stillness of it, the deliberateness, stopped her at the bottom of the stairs. Her eyes went to the folder, then to me. She knew. Not the specifics, not yet, but she understood that the ordinary morning had become something else. I could see it in the way her weight shifted, the specific micro-adjustment of a person preparing for impact. "Sit down," I said. She sat. I did not raise my voice. I did not lean forward or grip the table or perform any of the physical theater of anger. I am a forensic accountant. I present findings. I opened the folder and I presented findings. "I'm going to show you some documents," I said. "I'd like you to understand that I have copies of everything, that my attorney has copies of everything, and that a private investigator has been documenting your activities since October. I'd also like you to understand that I'm not interested in a denial conversation because the documentation is complete enough that denial would be a waste of both our time." She looked at the first page. Her face did not collapse. I had expected some version of collapse, had prepared for tears or anger or the particular performance of remorse that sophisticated people sometimes produce. What I got instead was something quieter and, in its way, more revealing. She looked at the first page and then looked up at me with an expression I can only describe as exhausted. Not caught, exhausted. Like someone who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just been given permission to set it down. "How long have you known?" she said. "Since October." She nodded slowly. The phone. The phone. Silence. The coffee maker finished cycling. The kitchen light was the flat gray of a December morning. "I need to know one thing," I said. "Not for the legal process. Douglas has everything he needs. I need to know for myself." I paused. "When did it start?" She was quiet for a moment. 26 months ago," she said. "For months longer than Irene's documentation." I noted that and filed it. "Why?" This pause was longer. When she answered, her voice was level but not defended, the honesty of someone who has given up on management. "Because I felt like I had disappeared," she said. "Into the house, into your schedule, into the boys' lives. I had no income, no professional identity, nothing that was mine. And then I had something that was entirely mine and it." She stopped. "It paid well," I said. "Yes." "And the money went where?" "Savings. A separate account." "I know about the account," I said. "Douglas knows about the account." She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she said, "Are you going to tell the boys?" "Not in detail. Not yet. What I tell them will depend on what the next 6 months look like." "And Priya?" "I know about Priya too." Something shifted in her face at that, the first genuine crack in the composure. Not about her own exposure, but about Priya's. Even now, protecting something. "She wasn't involved," Vivian said quickly. "She only knew." "She didn't." "I know what she did and didn't do," I said. "It's documented." We sat in the kitchen for another 40 minutes. Not fighting. Talking. In the specific flat register of two people navigating the end of something enormous. She asked about the boys twice more. She asked once about the house. She did not ask about us, which told me something, or confirmed something I already knew. Before she left the kitchen, she stopped in the doorway and said, "I am sorry, Nathan. I know that doesn't reach it." "No," I said. "It doesn't." She went upstairs. I heard the bedroom door close. I sat at the kitchen table until the coffee was cold and the December light had shifted, and then I washed my cup and went to my office and called Douglas. The proceedings took 7 months. Douglas was methodical and thorough in the way I had always valued in professional relationships, and the case he built was constructed on the foundation Irene and I had assembled: the financial documentation, the parallel income, the marital asset implications of 26 months of undisclosed earnings, the separate accounts, the pattern of deliberate concealment. Virginia divorce law does not require fault, but fault affects equitable distribution, and the documentation established fault with the precision of a forensic audit. Vivian retained her own attorney, a woman named Catherine who was sharp and not without skill. But she was working with a disadvantaged position, and she knew it. The settlement negotiations took 4 months and produced an outcome that Douglas described, with characteristic understatement, as favorable. The house was mine. The primary custody arrangement gave Leo and Sam their primary residence with me, with scheduled time with Vivian, an arrangement both boys knew was coming and accepted with the specific resigned adaptability of teenagers who understand that the adults around them have broken something irreparable and are now managing the debris. Leo processed it internally, as he processed everything. Sam asked me once, directly, in the car after a soccer practice, whether Mom had done something wrong. I said that our marriage had stopped working and that what happened between adults was complicated. He looked out the window for a moment and said, "That's not a real answer." I told him he was right, and that some real answers had to wait until he was older, and he accepted that with the grace I had not expected and was profoundly grateful for. Vivian moved to an apartment in Scott's Addition. She has resumed event planning, legitimately and exclusively. I know this not because I'm tracking her, but because the boys tell me things in passing, the ordinary narration of their time between two houses. She is a good mother. That has not changed, and I have never suggested it did. Priya called me in February, 3 months after the December morning. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that was careful and remorseful and, I thought, genuine. I did not call back. Some things are not about forgiveness or its absence. They're simply about the fact that certain relationships existed inside a context that no longer exists, and attempting to sustain them outside that context would require a kind of effort I don't have available. Marcus had dinner with me the week after the December confrontation. He brought good bourbon and said almost nothing about what had happened, which was exactly right. At the end of the evening, he said, "I should have said more." When I said she seemed different, "You said enough," I told him. I wasn't ready. "Are you ready now?" I thought about it. "For what comes next?" I said. "Yes. Claire is a colleague. She joined the firm 2 years ago, and we have worked closely on several complex cases. She is 41, precise, and has a particular quality of attention that I find, after the months I've had, genuinely restoring. We have had dinner 3 times. Nothing has been declared or defined. I am, as I told Marcus, moving with the specific care of a man who has learned the cost of incomplete audits. She knows what happened in the broad strokes. The firm is not large, and these things are known. She has not asked for details and has not offered sympathy in the performed way that sympathy sometimes arrives. She has simply been, in my presence, entirely herself. That is not a small thing. That may, in fact, be everything. The boys are 14 now. Leo has started drawing architectural plans, elaborate, detailed, for buildings that don't exist and may never exist and are magnificent in their specificity. Sam has become, improbably, interested in cooking. He made dinner for the 3 of us last month, something with pasta that he'd watched on a video and then adapted, with the confident improvisation that has always been his particular quality. And we sat at the kitchen table and ate it, and he said, "Well, it's good," Leo said, with the careful accuracy he brought to all assessments. "It's really good," I said. Sam looked satisfied. The kitchen light was warm. Outside, the February dark had settled over the Westover Hills neighborhood, and the house was quiet in the particular way it's quiet now. Not empty, not suspended, just still. The still of a place that has absorbed something enormous and continued. I have learned, in these 14 months, something that my professional training had not fully prepared me for: the difference between an investigation and a reckoning. In an investigation, you find the truth and present it. The presentation is the end point. In a reckoning, the truth is only the beginning. What comes after? The restructuring, the slow rebuilding of a life that now has different load-bearing walls. That is the actual work, and it has no deadline and no filing date and no opposing counsel. It is just the work. You do it. The cedar box, that was the last story. This one has different objects. This one has Leo's architectural drawings taped to the refrigerator. Sam's pasta. The bourbon Marcus brought. The particular way Claire tilts her head when she's reading something she finds interesting. Small things. Real things. Enough. What Nathan's story reveals, at its core, is the specific danger of a particular kind of trust. Not blind trust, not naive trust, but the trust of a man who believed that professional competence transferred automatically into personal clarity. He was trained to find hidden truths in financial systems. He audited client accounts with precision and skepticism. And yet for 2 years, the hidden financial system inside his own household went unexamined, because examining it would have required directing that same skepticism at the person he had decided, at some deep level, not to question. The cash withdrawals are the story's earliest and most damning red flag, and they are damning precisely because Nathan saw them. He reviewed the accounts monthly. He is a forensic accountant. The withdrawals registered and were filed under a category labeled ordinary domestic spending. Not because that explanation was convincing under professional scrutiny, but because applying professional scrutiny to his wife felt like a violation of the marriage's implicit contract. That is the specific mechanism of trust as blindness. It doesn't prevent perception, it redirects it. Nathan perceived the withdrawals. He chose not to examine them. That choice, repeated monthly for 2 years, is where the story's real architecture of failure was built. The Rowan misdirection is worth examining carefully, because it reveals something about Vivian's intelligence that the story's ending can cause us to underweight. Whether deliberate or not, the casual introduction of a professional contact's name gave Nathan's ambient unease a specific and incorrect target. He spent 3 months investigating a set designer from Northern Virginia while the actual situation continued uninterrupted. This is not an accident of circumstance. This is the result of Vivian understanding, at some level, how attention works, and how to manage it. She had spent 26 months managing information. By the time Nathan found the phone, she was skilled at it. The first genuine turning point is the phone itself, not as a discovery, but as a decision. Nathan found it and put it back. That single choice converted what might have been a reactive confrontation into a strategic investigation, and the difference between those two paths is the difference between the outcome Nathan got and a worse one. A reactive confrontation, in October, with no documentation and no legal preparation, would have given Vivian the opportunity to manage the narrative, move assets, and control the timing. His professional instinct, confirm before you act, build the complete picture before you present it, protected him in ways that a more emotionally immediate response would not have. The second turning point is Sam's comment about his mother being seen in a part of town she shouldn't have been. This is the story's most emotionally complex moment, because it reveals that the concealment had not been as complete as Vivian believed. It had simply been incomplete in directions that hadn't yet reached Nathan directly. Sam had heard something, processed it through a 13-year-old's framework, and brought it to his father in the oblique way children bring things they're not sure they should know. Nathan's response, calm, redirecting, protective, was right for that moment and cost him something. That is the specific tax of managing a reckoning while parenting. Every correct decision for the children is also a deferred cost for yourself. Two lessons live clearly in this story. The first is that professional competence in one domain does not automatically confer clarity in adjacent personal ones. The skills transfer, but only if you're willing to apply them with the same rigor. The second, harder lesson is about the cost of a life built around one person's career and the other's invisible labor. Vivian's explanation, that she had disappeared into the household, lost her professional identity, felt that nothing was entirely hers, is not exculpatory. But it is explanatory, and explanation matters for understanding how something this sustained becomes possible. A marriage in which one partner's identity slowly contracts and the other doesn't notice is already carrying a structural fault. The fault doesn't justify what happened. It does explain why the ground was prepared for it. What this story ultimately demonstrates is how completely a parallel life requires the complicity of the people around it. Not just active participants, but passive ones. Priya knew for 18 months and sat at Nathan's dinner table. Vivian's clients moved through hotel lobbies and private residences in a city where the couple had lived for over a decade. The parallel existence had geography, economics, and a social support structure. It was not a secret in the absolute sense. It was a managed disclosure, controlled carefully, with Nathan as the single person who was never supposed to find out. That specific design, a secret maintained not by invisibility, but by careful information management, is what makes this story's resolution feel both inevitable and earned. Nathan didn't discover the truth through luck or accident. He discovered it because a warm phone in a drawer finally exceeded the threshold of his willingness not to look. And once he looked, his professional tools did exactly what they were built to do. The tragedy is not that the truth was hidden so successfully. The tragedy is that the tools to find it had been available the entire time, and the only thing that had prevented their use was the decision, made daily, for 2 years, not to apply them at home. The boys are the story's moral anchor throughout. Every strategic decision Nathan made, the timing, the method, the language of the December confrontation, was calibrated around what would cost Leo and Sam the least. That is not martyrdom. That is parenthood in its most functional form, absorbing damage so that the next generation doesn't have to absorb it first. What I find most revealing about this story isn't the betrayal itself. It's the explanation Vivian gave. I had disappeared. She didn't say she fell out of love. She didn't say she wanted something Nathan couldn't give her. She said she had ceased to exist as an individual inside the life they'd built together, and she found a way to exist again that was entirely hidden from him. That is a painful thing to hold, because it suggests that what broke first wasn't fidelity, it was visibility. And that kind of erosion doesn't announce itself. It accumulates in quiet years, in routines that work too smoothly, in the space between two people that slowly stops being shared and starts being managed. The question worth sitting with isn't just what Vivian did. It's what goes unnoticed in the ordinary life of a marriage until the ordinary life is gone.